Morning, everyone. My name is Mike Masterson. I'm one of the automation specialists with the Reynolds Company out of the Houston office, and we do welcome you today. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the Stratix 5800, which is a product we've talked about a little bit for a while. That has finally been released and is currently available. With me today, hopefully doing the most of the talking, is Brandon Singh, one of my counterparts out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and myself. And just to let you know, we also have people in the background. So if you do have questions, feel free to put them into chat and we will get you your answers. We do have people monitoring questions in the background. And just to let you know, if you haven't heard, we are recording this session. And we'd like to teach you, show you a little bit about some upcoming events we have, because we have just recently flip-flopped some stuff. Due to some of the recent events that have happened to, let's say, Colonial Pipeline and stuff, we decided to move up some of our cybersecurity events. So next week's users group that was going to be looking at redundancy, best practices, have actually moved that back, and that will come up in July. But we will be Clarity will be doing a presentation next week looking at basic cyber security approaches. So hopefully please promote this to anybody, because this is a very hot topic. After the Colonial Pipeline issue, myself and my counterparts were all bombarded with calls. So this will go a little way to addressing how we see cyber security fitting into the OT environment. And our Tech Talks coming up, we are going to be having a full-blown industrial cybersecurity seminar on July 14th. This is a new event we put together, and this will be run from Rockwell, and this will be taking a look at Rockwell's approaches to cybersecurity. So it's going to be more of an in-depth dive into it. Then on July 28th, we're going to look at the PAX system estimator, and then we're going to look at lockout tagout on August 11th. And next slide. And I guess right now, let's start talking about the Stratix 5800. Brandon, are you going to take a lead on this, or do you want me to?
I am.
All right.
I will be taking lead. So good morning, everyone. So we will be talking about the Stratix 5800. I know we've discussed it in the past, and I've done a tech talk on this previously. But now that it is actually here and released, and orders can be placed, we wanted to bring it back, just to kind of reiterate some of the feature sets that it has and where it sits in the overall Stratix portfolio. So the Stratix 5800 overall portfolio, it is a 10-port base switch with a fixed or modular configuration. The base switch is 8-port. The base switch can be added with either an 8-port or 6-port expansion module to the switch itself. Very similar to what the former Stratix 8000 and 8300 offering was with the base unit and expansion modules, but there are some differences. So within the overall Stratix switch portfolio, the Stratix 5800 is a high performance, all gig layer 2 or layer 3 platform. It's positioned in between the Stratix 5400 and the Stratix 5410. And so this is an all gig platform that can be had in layer 2 or layer 3. And it's the performance side of it puts it toward the higher end of the spectrum. So some key attributes and benefits. It's an all gig platform, as I said, for high performance resilient network applications. It is offered in a fixed or module platform, providing configuration flexibility with minimal catalog numbers. In total, it can be had up to 26 ports in a variety of copper, power over Ethernet, PoE, and SFP combinations. It is offered in both layer 2 and layer 3 switching, with layer 3 providing the routing product being the main differentiator there within different plant architectures. It can support up to 24 ports of PoE power. It is supported by both IT and OT configurations and maintenance tools, allowing both teams be able to leverage and expertly be able to use this switch. Default configurations are set up for industrial applications for ease of setup and optimized performance. It does have Premier integration into Rockwell software, and you have the use of add-on profiles and named logic tags, as well as faceplates. You do have the SD card backup that is offered on, that is familiar and offered on other Stratix platforms. But with an added benefit on this one, you're able to also have easy iOS replacement, and we'll get into that when we talk about the new software behind the switch. New for this switch that is not available on other Stratix switches is the enhanced security options with the 62443-4-2 certification. And we'll get a little bit more into that as we get further into the slide. But basically, this switch does meet some NIST and IEC security requirements for having a truly secure network. This switch does meet those standards for that architecture, for laying that out. So the base unit, as what you see here, as I said, is an all gigabit base unit. It has 8 copper ports and 2 SFP slots for 10 port total base unit. It is very similar in layout to the Stratix 5700 and 5400. It can be added, the expansion modules can be added to it. Now, caveat to the expansion module that makes this different from the old 8000 or 8300 is this can only handle 1 expansion unit, whereas the switch that this replaces, this direct replacement for, is the 8000, 8300. You're able to add 1 or 2 expansion modules. This 5800 can only handle 1 expansion module. So you would have to pick what size expansion module that you're looking to add on to it if you have the modular base unit to connect to it.
Yeah, let me reiterate what Brandon just said. It's if you're going to expand it, you must have the modular base unit, not the fixed one. The fixed one is not expandable.
That's correct. The fixed unit is not expandable. So here we have the fixed base unit in layer 2. Layer 2 switches do not support expansion modules as well. The fixed layer 2 option. The modular layer 2 options do support 1 expansion module. Now, if you have a PoE switch on the base unit, you will be using the PoE expansion module. So you are kind of tied to that. If you get a PoE switch, you do have to use the PoE expansion module. And the layer 3 modular switch, again, only supports 1 expansion module. And the same thing goes, if you have a PoE layer 3 switch, you would have to use the PoE expansion module, whether that be the 8-port or 16-port. So as we have discussed expansion modules, there are 9 overall expansion modules between copper, PoE, SFP, or in a combination of both copper and SFP ports. So as I said, you have to pick which modular unit you're gonna, or which expansion module you want to add to your modular switch if you're going that route, because it only can take 1 at a time. That is very different from the modular switch that this replaces. Again, as I said, the 8000 to 8300, where you could add 2. This can only take 1. So if you know, if you're planning on using this for future expansion, keep in mind that it only takes 1 expansion module over either 8 or 16 ports, and those can be had in a variety of different combinations: PoE, SFP, copper, etc. So here we have a list of the summary of the Stratix 5800 catalog numbers. and the technical data manual and product profile. As you see, that is going to be available in both standard and advanced feature sets, as well as the firmware types, either layer 2 or layer 3. And you'll see the expansion modules listed below. Again, base unit, if you have a fixed base unit, you cannot use an expansion module. You'll make sure that your base unit has the modular functionality if you're looking to expand in the future. So some configuration guidelines we've already touched on. PoE switches only support the PoE expansion module. Switches, your base switch, if you don't have the advanced feature set, cannot use an expansion module that has an advanced feature set expansion module. Your advanced feature set base unit can use either a expansion module that either has the advanced unit or the standard feature set on the expansion module. So you have your option there if you have an advanced feature set on your base unit. And modular, the most important one is modular switches can only support one expansion unit, and a fixed unit cannot support any. So this is just a compatibility chart that goes over the different product profiles, and you have your switches across the top and your expansion modules as well. And it kind of lets you see there that what's supported and what's not supported in the different configuration guides. So with the firmware of the Stratix 5800, it's going to be offered in both layer 2 and layer 3 firmware. Fixed switches, so fixed base units that do not accept the expansion module are only supported in layer 2 firmware. So if you have to keep that in mind, that you cannot, all layer 3s will be modular units. All switches support crypto image and are classified as strong encryption. That ties back into some of the security functionalities that this switch has to get that certificate that I mentioned earlier. The 5800 does utilize the new Cisco iOS operating system. This is the same operating system that's used in the newer Cisco Catalyst switches. Through that configuration of the new Cisco iOS, there is a new GUI interface called Web UI. This does replace Device Manager. So if you're familiar with Device Manager on the current Stratix profile products on the 5700 and the 5400, that is not the GUI interface, the GUI web interface that you use to handle your Express setup or to manage your switch. If you're using Device Manager, it would be using the new Web UI based off the new Cisco iOS software that's supported in it. But with that new software, Express Setup is still available, as well as are the add-on profiles and the predefined name tags and the factory talk view faceplates. And then the security certificate, as I mentioned, the 62443 cybersecurity certificate. A couple key items about the certificate. One, certificate requires configuration of the switch in a specific manner to meet the standard. These specific requirements are itemized in the user manual. Two, the standard is only a consortium-based cybersecurity standard for industrial control systems and is only standard backed by both end users and equipment vendors. And it's on a global standard. So it's not a US standard or North American standard. It's a global standard that is backed by both end users and equipment vendors for industrial control systems. And third, the standard provides an independent certification, meaning that this is the accredited body is not associated with Rockwell Automation or with Cisco or anybody else. They're a solely independent organization, a global organization that does its own evaluations and determines who gets the certification, who doesn't. So here we'll move into the new some screenshots of the new web UI and some key attributes for it. So for customers who are familiar with Device Manager, the most significant difference is going to be the layout and the way it looks, and the transition to the new web UI GUI. If you're familiar with other Stratix switches, key attributes include a new menu structure and workflow. The lower right screen highlights the new menu structure, which is down on the left side. The example in the screen shows that the second level of navigation appears when you select the configuration tab. The top right screen shows a portion of the overview page. The overview screen has modular widgets, which can be arranged on the screen or hidden. The overview page also shows a picture of the switch. Some parts of this can be seen in the lower right corner screenshot. This shows real-time status updates of the switch. And then on the lower left screen shows the file manager. For this screen, you can see that files are in the switch, which are capable to add, replace, and delete these files. Some of those files can be like firmware updates or different configuration files that you've saved to the switch itself, and that are for past use. So some more screenshots. So new capability of these features to enhance troubleshooting and efficient use of configuration and monitoring tools. So that's been updated and from Device Manager. In the upper right, the debug bundle is the debug bundle page. This allows you to bundle CLI files typically used to debug into a single file, which can be easily sent for analysis. These are some things that would generally be used that in past on the other older Cisco switch or Stratix switches, the 5700 and the 5400. This is something you would have to connect into the CLI and do some of these configurations and debug files. Here on the newer web interface and web UI, you can do it directly from the GUI, which is nice. In the lower right is the ping and trace route screen, which allows you to ping another device without pulling out a separate diagnostic tool. So again, this is something that on when we have Device Manager, you would have to also be able to connect to the CLI directly to the switch to do some of those trace routes and ping and ping commands. Now we can do it all from the UI. And then the lower left is a direct interface to the CLI, which allows you to enter CLI commands without having to connect to the switch CLI separately using a console port. And any CLI commands, including any configuration changes, can be entered here to be executed as if you were connected to the console port itself. So it's nice not having to have a console port connected to the switch as well as to your laptop, and then having your laptop also connected to an open port to run Device Manager. You can do everything through this GUI interface, which is nice. Some major differences between the classic iOS platform, which is what is ran on the 5700 and the 5400s, and the new web UI. As I said, the Express setup is still supported. However, it's the functionality of how it's ran has changed a little bit. There's a new IP address to run the Express setup. It's different than what would traditionally be used on a 5700 or 5400. Updates and sync times. So the updates can be done in 5 minutes or less. These are including file transfer times. On the older Device Manager in the older iOS platforms, they could take a little longer than that. Sometimes they could take a while to run a firmware update and a file transfer from an SD card that you plug into the older switch. So now those times have been sped up. And the sync is only available from booted media to non-booted media. So that would be the SD card or a USB bootable device, which is new. There are no flex links features. So that's something to keep in mind, that flex links cannot be done on this switch. And there's no motion prioritization in the quality of service macro. So when you're configuring this switch, if you're using it for a motion application and you want your motion, stop starts and all of those things for your motion applications, and you want that communication and traffic to be prioritized as first. Unfortunately, this switch does not offer that macro in the quality of service. And when you're using the web UI and you're using the CLI plugin there, you must save all your running configs for retention over a power cycle. So if you make any changes to the CLI within that plugin on the new web UI, make sure you're saving that running config, because if there were to be a power cycle, then that change you made would not be saved to the switch. So some highlights of the layer 2 firmware. We're still able to do basically everything that the other switches in the portfolio, the 5400 and the 5700 can do in layer 2. Rep ring, spanning tree, SIP sync, quality of service, VLAN trunking, etc. Some added things to this are on the security end, as I said, with the 62443 certification. That's the big one, as well as some of the crypto encryption, as well as also doing other encryptions such as the SSH and HTTPS. We have the new web UI that is available. That's going to be all across the entire platform. So that'll be on layer 2 and layer 3. Integrated NAT for network address translation, DHCP port, persistence. So all of those things, features, the layer 2 will be there that are familiar with other layer 2 switches. Some layer 3 highlights. We will have the dynamic routing, similar to what's available on the 5400, with the being able to having the different routing. We'll have some redundant routing that's added that'd be new for this switch, which HSRP, the highly resilient routing protocol. We will have some multicast routing through PIM. We'll have some policy-based routing, as well as being able to function some inter-VLAN routing, which can be available on some of the layer 2 switches as well, to where if you want to do some routing, but you don't need a full-blown layer 3 switch for that routing, we could do some inter-VLAN routing through the NAT as on some layer 2 switches, but on all layer 3 switches. So some of the advanced feature sets that'll be available on the will be the parallel redundancy protocol, PRP, which we've discussed in the past. We'll have some TrustSec layer 3 is trust security. That's some of the security functionality that'll be on layer 3 switches only. We'll have some high availability seamless redundancy, HSR. Those are going to be available on the advanced feature set and a future firmware release. But that is think of it a DLR ring with a much faster recovery time. That's how to think of HSR. And then as future developments are made, they'll be included in future firmware updates. So some resources and tools.
Brandon, this is for my information. Is the HSR going to be?
What was that, Mike? You broke up. I couldn't.
Needs to go on. I've got a bad.
Okay. I think your question was going to be about HSR and when it was available. HSR is not available currently, but it is something they're working on for a future firmware update and release. So these are some resources.
Specifically looking at layer 2.
I'm sorry. So these are some tools and resources as far as the Stratix 5800 goes, and all of these tools and resources are available now. We have the 5800 user manual. It has been updated in the new technical data manual for the Stratix product portfolio, as well as a specific 5800 product portfolio guide. There is a customer presentation available, as well as this presentation itself that I'm giving. There is the custom logic designer and add-on profiles. Those are going to be extremely similar and almost identical to the setup that is available now for 5700s and 5400s. So if you're familiar with those, it'll be identical in the process for the 5800, as will the Factory Talk View faceplates. And it is supported in the Factory Talk Network Manager software. So we reached the end of the presentation. I know Mike had a couple questions, but had a bad connection. Brian, Wayne, were there any other questions that came in?
Nope, all good on our side.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for attending. And if you do have any questions, please reach out to your rental specialist and we can get those answered for you.